Tonight, Iran releases video of the missile the regime claims shot down an American drone. This as the president pulls back, calling off a planned strike against Iran moments before the attack.
This is truly a defining moment for him.
Reaction from Republicans and Democrats on the Hill.
Churches are soft targets.
And hardening protection for places of worship. The FBI meets with faith leaders from around the country to prevent the next attack.
Instantly, we just became like best friends.
Plus, meet the dynamic duo fighting childhood cancer around the globe. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. President Trump calls off a military strike against Iran with just minutes to spare. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm Eric Phillips in for John Jessup tonight. The commander-in-chief put the brakes on the attack after being told 150 people would die. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us with those details. Ben.
Well, Eric and Jenna, we are hearing that U.S. planes were about to take off and ships in position when President Trump pulled the plug on the strike. The move was against recommendations from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton. President Trump said he changed his mind when told how many people would be killed. The president tweeted, "We were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites when I asked how many would die. 150 people, sir, was the answer from a general. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it."
They came and they said, "Sir, we're ready to go. We'd like a decision." I said, "I want to know something before you go. How many people will be killed?" In this case, Iranians. I said, "How many people are going to be killed?" "Sir, I'd like to get back to you on that." Great people, these generals. They said, came back, said, "Sir, approximately 150. And I thought about it for a second. I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people that would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said go ahead. Yeah. And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
Today, we also have new video of the wreckage Iran says is of the U.S. drone. The wingspan is as broad as a 737 and is one of America's most sophisticated drones, costing $130 million. Iran has taken responsibility for the shooting down the drone, that is, but says it had flown into their space and had no choice but to defend their borders. Not true, says the U.S. military, who said it was flying in international airspace roughly 21 miles from the Iranian coast when it was hit. Now, the FAA has halted all U.S. commercial flights over Iran and the Gulf where the drone was shot down. Trump said that more sanctions were added against Iran last night as we wait to hear what those new sanctions are. Eric, Jenna?
Ben, what's been the international response?
Jenna, we've heard from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who called on peace-loving nations to stand with the U.S. But back here at home, lawmakers are really split on what the next move should be. Trump is now urging Iran to hold talks with the U.S. Eric, Jenna?
Well, Michael O'Hanlon, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, joins us now for more. Michael, what do you make of all of this? The president authorizing a strike, recanting, and now seeing all of it out in the public.
You know, I've been pretty supportive of the president's approach here, even though, like usual with Mr. Trump, it's a little unorthodox, and it's not always the right way to make sausage or make foreign policy decisions. But in this case, I like the fact that he's basically made it clear to the world that he went 99% of the way up to pulling the trigger, which implies that probably if there is a next time, he will feel obliged to pull the trigger. And certainly if there's any further escalation that it involves loss of American life, his logic would lead one to conclude that he would retaliate. But by sparing the Iranians here, he, first of all, reduces the chances of a war escalating. Secondly, he also reestablishes a bit of moral high ground for the United States in what is the real struggle here, which is in the economic and diplomatic realm, as we try to put enough economic pressure on Iran to get them to agree to a more fundamental change in their behavior towards the region than the Obama administration was able to achieve. And I think it's going to be very hard to do that. I'm not sure I fully agree with President Trump's strategy because I'm not sure it's realistic. But I do think that given that that's what he's trying to do, painting himself as the more restrained, reasonable, nonviolent player in this dynamic is actually pretty good strategy. So I have no complaints, even with the apparent, thinking out loud, changing his mind as he went. I think the overall package of thoughts and statements has worked out to get us to a pretty good place. But of course, we're just at a way station, and we have to watch what happens next.
Yeah, and Michael, talking about that thinking out loud, the fact that that process was leaked by a senior administration official, and then the president responded to that on Twitter, giving more details. What do you make of that?
I think it was calculated, and I think that's to good effect in this case. It's not always good when administrations leak about their own inner deliberations and so forth. But in this case, I think they probably figured out after the fact that what I just said is something that they agree with, whether others will or not. But seeing the president think this through, that he certainly has the willingness to use force, he certainly is not trying to be forgiving towards Iran writ large, but in this particular instance, he's decided to show a little bit of patience. I think that is actually a complex message that works to our advantage. And the White House figured out it would be advantageous for the world to know about it, so they deliberately leaked it, and then President Trump reinforced it once the message was already out. So I wouldn't call it good cop, bad cop. It's more like leaky cop, tight-lipped cop. But in the end, the message suggests that we have resolve, if need be, to use force in the future, but we're also trying to give peace a chance, so to speak, one more time before doing so.
Well, would you say that it was irresponsible for the media to use that leaked information, not having the full picture, in other words, not having the context of why the president changed his mind? No, I think that the media was within its rights to use information that had been deliberately conveyed by an administration official. In a sense, the media was being used because it behaved in the way the White House could predictably ascertain that it would behave, that it used this information, got it into the public space, and that's exactly what the White House wanted to happen in this case. And I think, because it doesn't give away any deep state secrets, there's no reason for the media to have felt obliged to show restraint.
Oh, fascinating. Well, Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution, good to see you, and thank you for your expertise.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The last-minute presidential pullback is sending ripples along the campaign trail and on Capitol Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she was not notified of the president's attack plan and that he shouldn't authorize a strike without congressional approval. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has the mixed reaction in Congress.
As tensions rise between the U.S. and Iran, a bipartisan group of lawmakers argue Congress must have a say over what's worthy of spilling American blood and what isn't.
The president, I think, doesn't want us to go to war.
California Democrat Ro Khanna is working with Republicans to give Congress a say in military action against Iran.
The president needs to come to Congress first to get authorization for any military action.
The bill would help parse legislative and executive war powers.
We have to protect American interests, but how do we define what they are? Congress must act. It must have the authority of Congress before we initiate military hostilities.
Lawmakers on the Hill are split over how the U.S. should respond to the drone attack.
I wouldn't respond to the attack on the drone. I think we should just continue doing what we're doing.
If we do nothing, it just encourages Iran further.
Senator Amy Klobuchar took to Twitter, warning that the president has to stop tweeting us closer to a war with Iran. Senator Elizabeth Warren says the president is to blame for instigating the conflict by pulling out of the Iran deal, with Joe Biden adding that the president's strategy in Iran is a self-inflicted disaster. The president has constitutionally invested power to use military force to repel attacks against the U.S., but only Congress has the right to declare war.
There's some disappointment. I think he shouldn't have called it off.
Illinois Republican Matt Kinzinger says the U.S. must respond in kind or face a crisis in confidence when it comes to Iran.
It's a direct response to what they did and degrades their ability to do that.
And in just a matter of days, Iran says it will exceed the amount of uranium limits set under the Obama-era nuclear deal the current administration withdrew from. Back to you, Jenna and Eric.
All right. Thanks very much, Abby. And here now for a roundtable discussion, Cheryl Chumley with the Washington Times and David Brody, CBN News Chief Political Analyst. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Cheryl, to you first. What do you make of lawmakers' reaction to how the president has handled this latest Iran deal?
Well, for Democrats, I find it a little bit humorous that had this been Barack Obama pulling out at the last moment, they would have hailed him as a peacemaker, and there would have been applause and cheers all around. I know some Republicans aren't enamored with the idea that he pulled out. Some wanted more aggressive action taken. But all in all, I think Trump comes out looking good, and I think the American people like the fact that he slowed the roll on this.
Cheryl, how do you see this playing in 2020?
2020 is a long way away, so a lot can happen. But at this immediate moment, I think it looks good for a president that the left has been trying to paint and as a military aggressor, surrounding himself with people who just want to go to war. How can this look anything but good for Trump right now?
Now, David, you know the president from a foreign policy perspective. Clue us in on what might be going through his mind right now.
Well, he loves to go with his gut instinct, and his gut instinct is to not go to war. Not only not go to war, but just really stay out of all of that over in the Middle East. How many times have we heard him complain about Afghanistan and the billions we're losing or we're spending there, and many other wars? So he's 100% has no desire to do that. Why? He looks at the prism of money, number one, but also there's some nationalism as well in there. You know, look, make America great again. And so but it's decision time for this president. He pulled back at the last moment, but that decision is coming eventually, because I don't think Iran's going to go away here, clearly. And the decision will be, you've got to protect America, but your natural gut instinct is to not do anything, and that's where the rubber will meet the road.
Do you agree with Michael O'Hanlon, who we just had? He says that President Trump and the White House are actually acting pretty stealth here in terms of Iran and how they're handling the media.
Yeah, I beg to differ a little bit. I would say this, that if that was the case, if the White House was leaking that story, well, then it was a poor job by the White House because they didn't get the headline they wanted out of the New York Times, which was Trump approved it and then abruptly changed his mind, which shows him as totally indecisive. So if you got to know the New York Times is going to write that story. And by the way, the New York Times was not correct when they said approve the strike. He initially approved the strike, but as Donald Trump said to Chuck Todd at NBC to Meet the Press today, that was not a final approval. And by the way, the planes were not in the air like the New York Times said they were. So a couple things there.
A question for both of you, about a minute left. At the end of the day, as we've seen this narrative play out throughout the day, where does the president stand now? Is he better or worse politically?
I think he's definitely better right now. I think it would have been worse for him had he gone forward with strikes, 150 people dead, and now today's media narrative would be how Trump is a warmonger who just recklessly goes in and kills people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say, remember what he does on Twitter, right? When someone insults him, he punches back twice as hard. Well, Iran might have insulted him to a degree, but it was an unmanned drone assault. Or insult, I should say. If that becomes a manned drone, or when civilians are involved here, then watch for the serious punchback. You don't want to mess around with Trump. I don't think anybody wants to do that.
All right, David and Cheryl, thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, the State Department is working to do more in the fight for religious freedom around the world. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announcing plans today to make the issue a bigger priority.
Given our own great freedoms, it's a distinctly American responsibility to stand up for faith in every nation's public square. So today I'm pleased to announce that here at the State Department, we're elevating the Office of International Religious Freedom along with the Office of the Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism within our organization.
Pompeo says the change will help provide additional staff and resources to the issue of religious freedom and ending anti-Semitism.
Coming up, violence against houses of worship is at epidemic levels. How faith leaders are working with the FBI to turn the tide.
This week, dozens of faith leaders from around the country met at FBI headquarters here in Washington, D.C. to talk about ending terror attacks against houses of worship, and not just churches, but synagogues, temples, and mosques as well.
That's right. Whether you observe Christmas, Hanukkah, or Ramadan, it doesn't make a difference when it comes to the violence that has been experienced by all religions. And we're not talking about actions abroad. These are attacks right here on American soil. I was one of a handful of journalists given access to the meeting, and faith leaders told me they need more than just prayer. August 2012, a man killed 6 others and himself at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. It happened as members were preparing a meal. June 2015, members at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina were having midweek Bible study when a stranger showed up. They welcomed him, and he participated until he took aim at the faithful, murdering 9 Christians. November 2017, an attacker unleashed a hail of gunfire at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. 26 people were assassinated, including an unborn child. October of 2018, a gunman stormed the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. During morning Shabbat, 11 killed, 7 injured. And April of 2019, a 21-year-old accused of scorching 3 black churches in Louisiana. Thankfully, no lives lost there.
Churches are soft targets. African American churches have always been seemingly more trusting of people who come and go, more embracing of strangers.
We want to have a welcoming church where, people are really welcomed in, but then on the same token, we must have a secure place to worship.
People are afraid.
John Cohen is a professor at the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice and a Homeland Security expert. He helped organize the meeting.
The fact that we had senior officials from the FBI, senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security, senior law enforcement officials from cities across the country, and faith leaders together in one room talking about this problem.
The group discussed security measures houses of worship can put in place.
Many of us cannot afford security guards and officers and so forth. And so now how we began to utilize members of the congregation.
Another main focus was making sure information from faith communities flows to law enforcement and vice versa when an emergency situation happens.
We're going to actually be forming what we would call a Christian Unified Command. And so what that is that in the realm of emergency response, they call it incident management system. It's kind of like what Nehemiah did. He gave everybody a role.
And one familiar refrain that came out of this meeting: if you see something that looks suspicious, say something. According to law enforcement officials, bystanders are still by far the biggest key to stopping the bad guys before they strike.
Up next, the dynamic duo taking the fight against childhood cancer across the globe. The story of a congressman and his 11-year-old sidekick.
Welcome back. One congressman on Capitol Hill wants to take the fight against childhood cancer global and believes U.S. support can make a drastic difference in the current fatality rates.
Abigail Robertson recently spoke with Congressman Michael McCaul about why he's made this his mission in Congress.
Congressman Michael McCaul lost his best friend to leukemia in grade school. Now, he's determined to make a difference in the fight against childhood cancer. And with the help of his 11-year-old sidekick, Sadie Keller, he is.
Instantly, we just became like best friends.
Sadie, a cancer survivor, met Congressman McCaul about 5 years ago.
She's my best lobbyist, and I love taking her on the floor.
And has lobbied with him ever since.
It really brought sort of the face of the movement, if you will, to life.
McCaul founded the Childhood Cancer Caucus more than a decade ago.
They didn't have a voice. There are no lobbyists for these children. And I wanted to form the Childhood Cancer Caucus to really give them a voice.
Since then, they've passed 4 major pieces of legislation.
There hadn't been a new drug really on the market since the 1980s when I first came into office. That has changed now.
The STAR Act is the most comprehensive childhood cancer legislation to date.
Would you like to say something, darling?
I'm just so honored to be here, and this is just such an amazing opportunity, and just thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart. You're very nice.
Usually the author gets a pen, but he gave her the pen, and it was so appropriate, and it was so cute.
I can't even describe it. It was just incredible.
And this dynamic duo isn't finished yet.
Sadie and I have big plans, and we're going to take this mission global, sort of in a missionary way.
The U.S. has an 80% survival rate for pediatric cancer, but overseas, it's a different story.
If you look at the continent of Africa, 90% of children that get cancer die. So it's a very high mortality rate.
McCall believes they can use the global infrastructure to fight AIDS and HIV, known as PEPFAR, to bring cancer drugs and treatments into areas without easy access.
Because the infrastructure is there and the doctors are there, it's really a training piece, and then getting the drugs into these countries, which we think could be donated.
There's strong bipartisan support for this idea on the Hill. Next up, presenting the plan to the UN.
It's kind of hard to say no to something that could have this much potential to save lives.
To show her appreciation to the congressman.
It's one of my best gifts.
Sadie made him 2 paintings, now on display in his office.
And how it kind of goes from dark to flowers is kind of how I turned a bad situation into a good situation with my cancer journey.
Sadie will return to the Hill to lobby for the Global Hope Act, and she also helps kids fighting cancer through the Sadie Keller Foundation, which donates gifts to children in the hospital on Christmas and gives gift cards to parents struggling to care for their sick children. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
When we come back, a message from the brink of death. Find out the meaning behind these cryptic letters and this tattoo. Stay with us.
Finally tonight, the story about a miraculous meaning behind a tattoo. That tattoo belonging to Maddie Johnson and inspired by her Aunt Tina, who suffered a heart attack, died, and was brought back to life 4 times by first responders before making it to the hospital.
There, her aunt was put on a defibrillator and woke up intubated and unable to speak. She asked for a pen, scrawling the message, "It's real." When asked what was real, her aunt responded with tears in her eyes by pointing up to heaven. That message now a memorial.
And
wow.
This is just, yeah, it's gone viral. I think it's all over the internet. And
if you didn't know it was real before, you know it now.
Inspiring a lot of people.
That'll do it for us tonight.
Have a great weekend.